The Thief, the Witch, and the Shop of Curiosities by Isherwood. Chapter 1. The Thief. Peter woke in his bedroom in the dark. He was sure he'd heard a noise. He sat up in bed. There it was again. It sounded as if it had come from downstairs. Was someone in the house? He stepped out of the warm bed into his slippers and grabbed his dressing gown from the back of the door, then slipped it on. Peter shivered in the cold of the early morning. He quietly crept down the landing towards his mum and dad's room. Halfway there he stopped and opened his brother Spike's door. It creaked on its hinges. Spike was 15, 5 years older than Peter, and was fast asleep in his bed. His complexion was a little lighter than Peter's, not as dark, as he'd taken after their mother, despite his big rugby player size. Unusually, he wasn't snoring. Not him downstairs, then. Carrying on to his parents, he entered silently, and there on the bed lay his mum and dad, also asleep. They lay peacefully quiet in the moonlight, a lovely contrast of colour between his mum's milk-white English and his dad's warm brown Namibian skin. Not them, then, either. He switched on the light, rushed over to the bed, and shook his dad's shoulder. Dad, there's someone downstairs." Nothing he did, no matter what, could rouse his father. He moved to his mother and shook her. Mum, there's someone downstairs. Come on, wake up, please." He shook her again, and this time he even pinched her arm. She didn't stir. His heart beat fast in his chest. "What's going on?" he said to himself, his stomach knotting tight with fear. He left their room and shuffled along back to Spike's. Same thing happened there too. Nothing he did would wake Spike. The last attempt he shouted, "Spike!" a little too loud. He knew this because just then the sound downstairs stopped. Oh no. Peter waited and waited, still no sounds. His heart pumping, he made a decision. He would go downstairs. Maybe the person had heard him and left. He tiptoed to the top of the stairs and started to descend. The first floorboard on the stairs creaked, and the second, and the third. Each time they did, Peter winced. The fifth and sixth were silent, though his imagination wasn't. In his mind, he imagined a tall, scary burglar with a large knife waiting for him. Peter's breath came hard and loud. He tried to quiet down, but couldn't. He was sure the burglar, if he was still there, could hear him. He got to the bottom of the stairs, looked left and right, but saw no one. No burglar. He stepped out of the hallway into the living room. His knees trembled. Turned the light on, but it didn't work. Electricity's off. Peter finally noticed him. The curtains had been partially left open in the bay window of the front room. A tall male figure stood in the orange half-light from the street. Peter screamed and ran. The figure followed him silently and steadily. Peter raced for the door, shouting as loud as he could, "Help! Help! Mom! Dad!" No help came. Peter frantically unlocked the door. His fingers fumbled as he turned the key. Mum was getting closer and closer. Finally, the door unlocked and opened. The burglar stopped only a few feet behind him. He said nothing but watched silently. Peter ran into the night shouting for help. He went straight to the next door house and banged on their front door. No reply. He tried the next house and the next. No one was coming to help him. The feeling of panic was overwhelming. The police station isn't far, he thought, and started to run again, and that was when he started noticing. He couldn't put his finger on it to start with, but then he realized the night was utterly still. It wasn't the usual false quiet of night, where if you listened carefully you could hear all kinds of things. This was a total silence. A silence so complete that he slowed down because the sound of him running was all he could hear, and he felt self-conscious and awkward. He looked for the first time at the road next to him and stopped altogether. In the road, 2 cars sat stationary, not parked on the side, but stopped right in the middle of the road. He looked both ways as he had been taught, left and right, and jogged over to the nearest car. Inside, a man stared straight ahead, both hands on the steering wheel, concentrating on the road. He tapped hard on the window. Hey, mister, can you help me?" The man didn't move, didn't even blink. "What's going on?" Peter moved to the other car. Inside, a woman sat in the driver's seat, also holding the steering wheel with both hands. Her mouth was open. In the passenger seat, a man sat turned to the woman driving, his mouth open as well. They looked like they'd been frozen mid-conversation. This time Peter didn't bother tapping on the window. He turned and ran in the direction of the police station. He veered down left side of the road and past more cars frozen mid-journey until he saw the lights of the police station. It was an old grey stone building with 2 columns in the front. Over the door, a lit sign said, Jedderington Police Station. Peter dashed through the front door and stopped dead. Directly inside was the inquiry desk. A policeman stood on one side of the counter, unmoving. Opposite him stood a man pointing a finger at him, his mouth agape. Neither moved. Neither even breathed. Peter walked slowly around them. He nudged the man, who was like stone. He waved at them, stamped his foot, shouted, and out of frustration he began to cry. Tears flowed, and he felt ashamed. What is this? Peter sat down on the wooden bench that leaned against the opposite wall. He felt cold. He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his dressing gown, lay down on the bench and curled up into a ball, tucking his knees up to his chest. He lay there for a while, thoroughly miserable. The hardwood of the bench was the definition of uncomfortable. When he couldn't stand it anymore, he sat up and took note of his surroundings in a little more detail. The clock on the police station wall seemed broken. The hands didn't move. For a while Peter just sat there, shivering, deeply unhappy. Then an idea took hold. He got up, went to the desk, and looked at the watch on the wrist of the man. His watch wasn't working either. He looked at the policeman's. His was also broken. And even more curiously, all 3 timepieces had broken at the same time. Or had they? Time has stopped! Time has stopped! Peter shouted. It's the only thing that makes sense, but how is that possible? Peter started to pace in the waiting room, debating aloud. It makes sense. Mum, Dad, and Spike didn't wake up. Neither did the neighbours. The cars were all stopped. The people were all frozen. Watches and clocks all stopped at the same time. What should I do? Go home? Talk to him? What if he hurts me? Or kills me? He stopped pacing. He probably could have done that already. He sat down again, clenching and unclenching his fists. You're acting like a coward, Peter. Your family is there. Go back and do something. He stood up and strode out the door, his face full of purpose and his legs full of jelly. Peter was going home. It took ages in the eerily silent darkness of the town. His fear stalked him all the way, even when he reached the door of his house. It was wide open. He entered. The lights were still out, but he could clearly make out the shape of the man at the bottom of the hallway. He hadn't budged at all. Not an inch. The figure motioned for him to follow. Peter forced one foot in front of the other. He was shaking, but not from the cold. Peter walked slowly down the corridor and followed the tall intruder, who sat down in Dad's easy chair. Peter sat in Mum's opposite the burglar, who lit a candle and put it on the coffee table. The white candle sat in an old-fashioned pewter holder. For the first time, Peter had a clear look at him. He was a handsome man, with dark hair and dark eyes, dressed all in black. His complexion was slightly dark, with a Mediterranean look. Peter spoke first. What's going on? What's happened to time? The burglar took out a most extraordinary object from his outer jacket pocket and placed it next to the candle on the coffee table. It was an old-fashioned silver alarm clock, about the size of a grown man's hand. Sitting on top of it was a living creature, a blue imp, no bigger than the man's finger. It held the little and big hands of the clock. Alarmingly, it grinned and winked at Peter. A useful device, explained the burglar. Who are you? Peter yelped. I'm known as the thief. Please, can you put everything back to normal? Soon. but I need you to listen. I know you are scared, but do you think you can do that? I guess so. Do you walk through the high street in your town on your way home from school? Yes. The next time you do, look for a black door with a red knocker. It will have a sign above the door. The sign will read Bottega. The sign on the door will look very old. Peter frowned. I don't understand. There isn't such a place on the high street. There will be. Listen, when you see it, go and knock on the door. What if I don't? Peter challenged. You will. How can you be so sure? Ask yourself this and then decide. Why, if all of time was frozen by my device, were you unaffected? Think on that. And if you want an answer, knock on the black door. He stood up, leaned over, picked up his imp-controlled clock device and put it back in his jacket pocket. He then picked up the candle in its pewter holder and mysteriously put that in his jacket as well. The moment he did, the room turned dark and the living room light came on. The thief was gone. Peter sat alone. Dad! Mom! Spike!